Members of the chair apologizes for the delay. Members, the chair today is just going to go over the general process, speak a bit to the map that the chairs have filed and that's before you today, but we're not going to present that map today, more so just speak to the process used in drawing it and discuss our schedule for this committee moving forward for the rest of this week as well as next week. Members, as you all know, both parties have a room at the General Assembly that they can use to draw maps. Of course, I notified Representative Reeves back in August 23rd, of where the Democrats' room would be, and we did not start drawing anything using, we didn't start drawing any maps until on or after that date that that email was sent. And so the process that we have used in the map before you today is generally as follows. So we hired a expert consultant. His name is Blake Springhetti to help us draw the State House map. Mr. Springhetti worked previously for the Ohio legislature, where he has vast experience drawing redistricting plans. And the way that we approached it is we sent instructions, written instructions, to Mr. Springhetti on how to draw these maps, and that is the traditional redistricting principles that we asked him to use in drawing those maps. Those are as follows. Draw House districts to be within plus or minus 5% of the ideal district population. Draw congressional districts to comply with federal standards for equal population. Draw House and congressional districts that are contiguous. Contiguity by a point is not permitted, but contiguity by water is permissible. Draw House districts within county groupings as described by the Stevenson versus Bartlett case of the North Carolina Supreme Court and subsequent decisions by the North Carolina Supreme Court. And we noted that the county groupings used in the 2022 House Plan are sufficient. Within county groupings, only draw House districts that traverse county lines one time at most. New districts will be drawn, and the map drawer will not be bound by the location of prior district lines. Data identifying the race of individuals or voters shall not be used in the construction or consideration of districts in the 2023 congressional and House plans to the extent feasible. Draw districts that are visually reasonably compact. No mathematical tests are required. Take reasonable measures to draw districts and respect and follow contiguous municipal boundaries. Take reasonable measures to draw districts that do not split VTDs. Election results from the following elections may be considered: 2020 presidential, 2020 governor, 2020 lieutenant governor, 2020 U.S. senator, all of these, of course, from North Carolina, 2020 attorney general of North Carolina, 2022 U.S. Senate for North Carolina, both 22 elections for Supreme Court of North Carolina. To the extent feasible, do not double bunk incumbents of any party into the same district. And incumbent House members' local knowledge of communities of interest may be considered. When the information is uploaded to the Map to 2 program, and again, that's on the computer here at the General Assembly. The chair's informed that there was actually some more elections entered into the system, and so the elections that you see in your stat pack are ultimately the elections that were actually in the Map to 2 system as those districts were drawn by Mr. Springhetti. Members, as we well know, the North Carolina Supreme Court, as well as the United States Supreme Court, have both held that election contest data may be considered in the drawing of the districts. Accordingly, the election contest data that we considered strongly informed the construction of districts across the plan, and again, racial data was not used. House members provided input regarding local knowledge of district areas, as well as communities of interest. No members in this State House plan who are running for re-election to the North Carolina House of Representatives are double bunked. Incumbency was not considered, of course, for those members who have announced that they're either retiring from the House or running for another office. By way of example, Representatives Kristen Baker and Wesley Harris are technically double bunked with another incumbent in this plan. However, both have announced publicly that they're not running again. And as such, their incumbency was not considered in formulating the plan. Members, as to the issue of racial data, we know that the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court has said that the predominant use of race to draw districts violates the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, unless so doing serves a compelling governmental interest. The U.S. Supreme Court has assumed but hasn't squarely decided that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act can serve a compelling interest to use race to draw districts if race-based choices are narrowly tailored to Section 2 compliance. But for the predominant use of race to be justified under Section 2, there must be a strong basis in evidence of the three Jingles conditions, and of course that refers to the Thornburg versus Jingles case from the United States Supreme Court. We are not now in possession of information that would satisfy the conditions as outlined by Jingles. Accordingly, to engage in race-based redistricting would entail a substantial risk of unconstitutional racial gerrymandering. As we know, the findings of the courts in the Cooper and Covington cases, both relatively recent cases in North Carolina dealing with redistricting, extensive expert testimony offered in those two cases, other expert reports reviewed by the legislature in prior redistricting sessions, all demonstrate that nowhere in North Carolina can anyone provide evidence of the three Jingles conditions. We know that we have received at least one letter essentially threatening a lawsuit and criticizing the body for not using race to draw districts. This was the letter from the Southern Coalition for Justice. So because of prior requests by Democratic members of this body, and given the letter that we received from the Southern Coalition of Social Justice, the chair will now direct legislative analysis staff that the racial statistics for the proposed districts be published and released. Again, I want to emphasize that racial data and statistics were not available to the map drawer or any legislative leaders or legislators who have been involved in reviewing our proposed districts. Members, as to the schedule of this committee, I anticipate that we'll meet here Monday at 3 o'clock. The Senate committee will likely take up the Senate and congressional map on Monday morning, so their committee will be before ours. That means if we're going to plan to meet here at 3 o'clock, of course, the plan will be to do just the State House map in here Monday at 3. So if you got amendments, if you get them to me as soon as you can. And in any event, we want to try to set a deadline of 2 hours before the committee starts. And obviously, I'm glad to talk to the members of the committee if we want to change the deadline around. But the goal of that, of course, is so that, as sometimes has happened in the past, and it's not the fault of any member, it's just that these folks behind me here have a lot going on, and they're getting amendment requests from the Senate and the House. And so if we have a 3 o'clock committee meeting and I'm receiving amendments up until 3 o'clock, we're not going to be able to start at 3 o'clock. You know, this stuff can get complicated. It takes a lot of time to review those things. So what the chair is going to ask at this point is for the committee's consent to set a 1 p.m. deadline to submit amendments to the committee. Again, that's 2 hours before our committee meets. Obviously, if something comes up and you've got an issue, let me know, and be glad to try to accommodate that. But again, the purpose of that is to try to keep us from being here all evening, Monday evening. And again, the chair intends to take up any amendments put forth by members of this committee. Then after Monday, there will be no floor votes Monday, by the way. Committee will be on Tuesday. This committee will meet again on Tuesday. Chair doesn't know yet whether it's going to be in the morning or the afternoon, but Chair will let the committee know as soon as we possibly can. Chair anticipates taking up the congressional and Senate maps, state Senate maps on Tuesday. And of course, we'll try to do the same method for a 2-hour deadline prior to committee to get proposed amendments in to the committee for them to be considered on Tuesday. Of course, then on Tuesday as well, we will likely vote on the State House plan on the House floor, and on Wednesday, we will likely vote on the Senate and congressional plans that come out of this committee on Wednesday. We will likely also hold Rules Committee meetings for each one of those maps. And so right now, I anticipate probably having a Rules Committee meeting on Tuesday morning, potentially. Same thing on sometime Wednesday before session. And that will be just like any other bill, going through rules after those bills come out of this committee. Okay, members, I believe the chair has said all the chair has to inform the committee at this point, so chair will stand for any questions that members may have. Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You spoke kind of fast, but I think I got notes down here about how you described the map drawing process. And I'm looking, so specifically related to the criteria that you referenced orally to Mr. Springhetti. I am looking at the 2021 criteria, and it looks to be reasonably similar. The differences, could you correct me if I'm wrong? It looks like with election data, which was prohibited to be considered in the 2021 redraw, you allowed for it to be considered. There is a reference to community consideration, communities of interest. You said that you spoke with individuals to get input, but was that a criteria that Mr. Springhetti used in the drawing?
So I think there are several questions there. The first thing I'll say is what the chair will do is just direct some of the staff members, which I'll email out to all the committee members a copy of the actual document that was sent to Mr. Springhetti, so that members have that and can ask those questions, of course, on Monday when we come back. Part of today's meeting, the purpose is to deal with issues like this, to make sure we're all sort of on the same page of the way this process works. And so the chair will have those written instructions sent to committee members. The chair didn't consult any of the 2021 criteria at all in determining what criteria we would use this time around. Of course, we were operating under a faulty legal theory in 21 and 22, and the Supreme Court has subsequently made clear that election data is a traditional redistricting criteria that is properly used in drawing maps, and election data was heavily relied upon in the drawing of these districts. Again, Chair will direct that we send out that criteria to all members, but the Chair wants to be clear, though, that no member of this committee is bound by the criteria that was used to draw the particular map before you today. So, Representative Harrison, if you decide you disagree with that criteria, you can draw it whichever way you see fit. The chairs of the committee gave reasonable consideration to whether we would actually adopt criteria or not, as has been done in the past. As the lady knows, being a long-term member of this committee, in the past we have adopted criteria that all the committee members had to abide by. So the decision was made not to tie the hands of any committee member at all, because some committee members want to use other criteria. The criteria I just laid out, and it's really more so than criteria, it's just the principles that were to be used in drawing the map. Those were the principles that were used in drawing the map before you. So did I answer all of those questions, and the lady continues to be recognized if she wants to be.
I'd appreciate it for a series of questions. I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And I think I'd ask specifically about communities of interest, but I'll wait to see whether it's on that list.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and tell the lady that members came in and here in Raleigh at the General Assembly and spoke to Mr. Springhetti. I was present for some of those, probably not even most of them. The other chairs would be there at times, and probably there were times when our chairs weren't even there. But members came in and spoke to Mr. Springhetti, and I presume that they told him about what their local communities should look like. Ladies recognized.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think I'll debate the substance more, I guess, on Monday as your preference. But if we're talking about the creation of the maps, I think it's really important to take into consideration the recent Supreme Court case on Milligan, which, and you referenced Jingles, and I was just looking at the SCOTUS case here on Milligan, and they referenced Jingles, and I have a couple questions about that, but you're saying that the reason why y'all didn't engage in any sort of Jingles test is because you weren't presented with the 3 criteria. Did I hear you say that right?
Well, I think it's not only that, it's that in prior cases as well in North Carolina, the testimony, the evidence has been that criteria doesn't exist in this state. Nobody has presented it either in the 21 redistricting process, the 2022 process, nor this process. Those things have not been presented. And so to draw using race, of course, risks these maps being found unconstitutional for other reasons. But the chair has directed today that staff publish those statistics so that folks can analyze them and determine if those criteria can be met. But again, thus far, nobody has been able to do that in North Carolina. Lady continues to be recognized.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So, specifically with regard to Stevenson v. Bartlett, and the North Carolina Supreme Court said in Stevenson that to ensure compliance with federal law, legislative districts required by the VRA shall be formed prior to the creation of non-VRA districts. And I wonder if that happened in this case.
Again, because those Jingles factors are not present, which would be necessary to draw that type of district, no. The maps were drawn without using any data regarding race. And of course, now the chair will be directing that data be inserted by the nonpartisan legislative staff and published. That way, members of this committee and the public can take a look at it and make arguments for why they think they may disagree with the chair.
I appreciate that. I don't mean to dominate, but I know that we've had this conversation in previous redistricting cases about the nature of racially polarized voting. I guess you're telling me that there was no racially polarized voting analysis performed prior to this drawing,
well,
specifically.
So the chair didn't direct that be done specifically for this process, but as the chair understands it, that has been done in multiple lawsuits in this state over in recent history, over the course of the last 5 or 10 years, and those studies showed that there was no racially polarized voting in North Carolina.
I appreciate that. If I could follow up then. So I haven't had a chance to go through all of Milligan. I've gone through some of it, and I will definitely do it by Monday. It does seem that the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, can reaffirm that Section 2 requires an intensely local appraisal of the electoral mechanism at issue. And it just seems that would necessitate considering district-specific racially polarized voting analysis versus any kind of statewide analysis that might have been done before that we had referenced before. So it does seem that Milligan makes it clear that the General Assembly must conduct a sensitive, localized analysis in areas where minority voters could constitute a majority in a reasonably configured district for purposes of compliance with the Voting Rights Act. I'll just state that for the record, I guess, and it doesn't seem that that's happened. And this seems like a really important part of the redistricting process. So I think, I'm not sure how these maps are going to comply with the Voting Rights Act if we haven't performed that racially polarized voting analysis that is specific to local areas. So I'll just make that point, and I will go into more detail when we come back on Monday, and I'll hold off my future questions for now and let others speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Harrison. And we'll obviously continue that debate. Obviously, the chair disagrees about the analysis of the lady, but we'll get further into that debate on Monday. And the chair is going to let members ask all the questions they want to today. But again, the chair would reiterate this is really for information overview purposes. Glad to answer the members' questions if you want to. Chair also is going to give you all the time you want on Monday to discuss these matters as well. Representative Carney, ladies recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask a few questions following up with your opening comments relevant to the process going forward. We've talked a little bit about what we have not been able to have exposed to some of us and the public, but a couple of questions that have arisen since the maps were released last night. Are there going to be any public hearings with these maps between now and Monday's meetings?
Well, there are going to be these committee meetings which are open to the public, and folks can watch online from anywhere in the world that has an internet connection. They can come sit in this committee, but the chair doesn't anticipate having any, in the sense that the lady's asking, are we going to invite folks to sign up and speak? We do have the online portal that will continue to be open, but of course, we've had throughout this cycle of redistricting probably a dozen or more public hearings. The populations haven't changed at all, and so of course it's at this stage, we've had ample public hearings in the opinion of the chair.
Thank you, and again, I'm emphasizing that these are questions people have been asking me and other members, and we're asking you to just say, it's those that are listening, pass the word. There won't be any public hearings other than what will be online. And so to that end, I think I heard you say that they can offer input through the portal, as some have done so far, their comments and questions.
That's right. Yeah, we've had many comments on the online portal, and that will continue to remain open.
Okay, so when we meet next week and we go over the maps, will there be an option for people thinking of traveling here to ask questions or make comments? Will there be public comments held at those times?
No, the chair will not be taking, this committee won't be taking up public comment at the committee meetings themselves. Those meetings will be for the members of this committee, and the same thing in rules for the members of the committee to debate those matters. And obviously the members of this committee have heard from members of the public, as the lady said she has, and are able to come in and ask those questions and debate those matters.
And then I just have one follow-up. These are all semantics with process going forward. And this is one that is, for me too, our budget in there revoked the statute for all materials relevant to redistricting. They're revoked from the public record. And I know in the past with my redistricting committees, everything public record, anything relevant to redistricting was required by law. And now is that the case that going forward, any information that we receive in relevance to redistricting, is that required? Is there a public records request required?
So the lady asked about the budget change regarding public records and redistricting, and what was done in that bill was to make North Carolina, like many other states across the country, to allow for a principle of the common law and principles of the founding fathers of this country regarding the speech and debate clause in the U.S. Constitution that we have a similar provision in North Carolina. It allows for legislative privilege. It allows for frank discussion among members. The same thing applies to members of Congress and their records as well. And in the past, that rule was essentially used to inundate members of this body with records request after records request. And so, no, those matters would not be a public record, but obviously, as is always the case in North Carolina redistricting, litigation happens, and entities can make certain discovery requests. It's the opinion of the chair that those matters are privileged if a legislator asserts those things, but that will be for those folks in those lawsuits to decide.
Well, thank you for that clarification. And just one more. So what are we going to be having some record, preserving the record from this redistricting process? So
this committee, of course, is recorded, and all of that will continue to be maintained. But otherwise, this process is just like any other bill that this body passes. And the prior change in the law that Lady recommended, it also made it, not in addition to making it like many other states and like the U.S. Congress has it, it also made it like every other bill that we do in this body. And that common law right to legislative privilege still exists. And so in terms of keeping the records, this committee, the hearings from this committee are being recorded and will be archived. All of the matters and in terms of the amendments and everything that members put forth, those are obviously going to be in the record of this committee, and members can decide that they'll keep whatever records they desire to keep.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here again. And I want to thank my colleagues for those opening questions. I'll try to keep this series of questions short because, as you mentioned, on Monday and subsequent days next week, we're going to engage in sort of further discussion. The first question is for clarification, and you said that racial data will be released online or directly to members?
I think we can have that released online and to members if that's what the committee members desire. But I think unless there's objection, the chair would just say release that online on the committee's website like all of our other documents. The chair will do that. Just put them online on the committee website whenever you get those.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was a follow-up to Representative Harris's question about would the courts, as it relates to the Allen v. Milligan case, will the courts have to engage, or can we proactively incorporate racial data for these maps? Like, would the courts, would we have to go through that entire litigation process to engage with racial data, or can we proactively look at what racial data looks like and how it could potentially impact people of color?
Well, I think that case said in places where the VRA might require that type of analysis, of course, that's got to be a part of drawing those districts, at least as we understand the law right now. And I think folks who have read many of those cases, it's almost Calvin ball, like the rules are constantly changing, and so the best that we can tell right now, with the evidence that we have in prior cases, at least from what I've read, there's not sufficient evidence for us to engage in the use of using those racial statistics to draw maps. But again, that's part of the process of allowing that to be published by the committee, so that folks, if they feel differently, can obviously put that forth to this committee, and we would respond accordingly.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next question is around criteria, and thank you for the outline of I don't want to mispronounce his name, Springhetti, and sort of what was shared with him, and then the subsequent, I guess, release. But what priority did you give, or did he give, to setting those criteria? Like, what did he rank more than the other as it relates to those? That's just important for us as committee members to know as we're analyzing these maps, because we sort of are treating them all as the same right now, but it'd be good to know what he was thinking.
Well, as the gentleman knows, some of those criteria have to be complied with. For example, the population requirements, they have to be contiguous. They have to be drawn within county groupings under Stevenson versus Bartlett. So in that sense, those are priority one matters because you have to do that. The law requires us to do those things. And then there are a number of other items in here that deal with compactness, dealing with sort of local issues that members may know about, where a high school is or a fire department and other things. And then there's, of course, the data related to election.
That seems like a case for at least reviewing what was drawn in 2022 and considering that sort of moving forward, right? As a map, especially if you're into supermajorities, that would be something that you wouldn't necessarily want to change and seemed something that worked out. The question is that was it the goal in these maps to draw a permanent super majority when we already had one?
So the answer is no, that was not a goal at all in drawing these maps. In fact, it's my opinion that it's not possible to draw a permanent supermajority anyway with the other redistricting criteria that we have in the state. For example, North Carolina has, in my opinion, the most anti-gerrymandering provision in the country, and that is the whole county provision in our state constitution. That for many years wasn't enforced because the differences in federal law, and of course that was the Stevenson and Bartlett case. But the net result of that is you don't see a lot of the crazy squiggly lines that are drawn across these maps. But really more importantly than that, it really tamps down in a more natural way the ability for any map maker to go in here and try to draw these districts with any political goal in mind. And so I can tell you there was no number or threshold that the members were trying to get to in working on this map. Gentleman continues to be recognized.
No, thank you. I've exhausted my questions for right now, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, sir. Representative Jones. Gentleman's recognized.
Good morning, Mr. Hall.
Good morning.
I'm kind of new at this, but I'm going to do my best to try to be succinct. The first thing I wanted to know was, I think I heard you say that you gave Mr. Springhetti some instructions. Oh, not you, but someone gave him some instructions as to how he was to do his work. And were they in writing, the instructions?
Yes, those were in writing. They were sent to him via email. And as I said, I'm going to direct that my staff send out a copy of those instructions that were sent to him.
Okay, I thought that's probably what you were saying, and that's good. Second question would be, beyond those instructions, was he given any other instructions, verbally, orally, by anyone else, as far as you know?
Well, I know he met here in North Carolina, here at the Legislative Building. And again, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have a room that they can go in and work on these maps here at the Legislative Complex. So Mr. Springhetti came down and he met with members, and so those members obviously, again, in my example earlier, they might think given high school needed to be in one district or the other. So, that again, that's the members' local knowledge that is a part of the principles that we sent Mr. Springhetti. So I don't think anything that was outside of the written principles in those instructions were used in drawing the districts.
My next question is, and maybe this wouldn't be possible at this point, but is Mr. Springhetti going to be available to any of us in the process where it stands now? Is there any question?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I would imagine probably not. This is, of course, a bill that I have filed along with the other chairs. So, it's our burden to carry that bill forth. And that's just like any other bill. And folks sometimes forget that this is another committee of this body. The bills that we file in this committee are, frankly, just like other bills. And as I'm sure the gentleman's done before, you talk to folks outside the building, experts in a given area when you're working on a bill, and you work with legislative staff to formulate that bill, and then you file it. You got to be the one to go to committee and argue for it and try to convince your members. But no, I don't anticipate Mr. Springhetti being here for the committee.
My next question is, if I can be recognized for my series.
Gentleman's recognized.
Yeah, thank you. Was Mr. Springhetti given any, I guess, for lack of a better word, political instructions? Partisan political?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, he relied heavily on election contest result data, and obviously he would have spoken to the members who came in to meet with him, and I'm sure some of them would, prefer their district to be one way or the other. And so, yeah, he certainly used election data results, as has been used for 250 years, in this country and in this state until 2019, when there was an erroneous, turns out, decision made by a court. Gentleman's recognized.
Next question I have is this, that if I'll make a little statement before I ask this question. The congressional districts went from 7-7 to 11-3 or 10-3-1, depending on which you select. So that's a dramatic shift. So I was trying to understand, if you're looking at pretty much the same data that was existing when the 7-7 got drawn, how it shifted from 7-7 to 11-3. And that's why my question really is to hone in on what Mr. Springhetti had in hand and what his directives were to make that dramatic a shift on the congressional district, the 14 congressional districts.
Okay, and so to be clear, Mr. Springhetti helped us with the state house map and not the congressional map at all.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but to answer your question, though, the Senate, of course, has filed a couple of congressional maps, and the chairs on this committee and our House leadership have worked with the Senate chairs and Senate leadership on crafting congressional maps. But the Senate largely, in terms of the actual drawing of it, they drew, but we went back and forth with them on the various changes that we wanted to make, just like any other bill when we're dealing with a House and Senate matter. And of course, those discussions are still ongoing. But what the chair anticipates is, obviously, one of the bodies has to take up the congressional map first. And rather than on our side taking it up and sending it over to them, they're going to take it up and send it to us. And that's largely a function of the state house map takes much more time to draw and deal with than the state Senate map does. State house map, if you think, as the gentleman knows from Wake County, you got 13 districts in one county you have to draw. Same thing in Mecklenburg, other parts of the map, you've got to spend a lot of time drawing. And in the Senate, they don't have that problem. Much of their map is made up of the county groupings, so they don't even really have to change. And then because of the size of those districts and just the number, the reduced number compared to us, doesn't take as much time. So that's why they're going to take up the congressional map first. But and I'll let them, answer those questions, and along with myself, whenever those congressional maps come in here. But in terms of a goal for how many folks get elected, as is always the case in these matters, the electoral environment's constantly changing. And what may have happened in 2020 or 2022 may not happen in 2024. And we've seen that in a number of parts of this state that used to vote for one party, and then they started voting for the other party, and vice versa. So I think the belief that really that these things can be drawn to sort of lock in any sort of number over the course of a decade, it sort of belies history and what really happens, especially in the long term. So there's no goal to elect a certain number of members from one party over the other. But anyway, I probably went further than the gentleman's question, but the gentleman continues to be recognized.
Okay. I think, Mr. Hall, I might be done for now, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
I saw Representative Harrison first. I'll come to you in a minute, Representative Carney. Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could follow up on a couple of points raised by my colleagues, I would appreciate it, a couple of points and questions. So, in the criteria that you referenced, that you directed Mr. Springhetti to use in drawing these maps, there was a requirement or a request to limit the number of municipal and VTD splits, if I heard you correctly. And it may be in the draft bill, and I just haven't seen it yet, but do we know what that number is?
As I understand it, in the State House map, there are only 6 VTDs split across the entire map, which is fewer than 2022, which is the current map.
Thank you. Do we know about the municipality aspect?
It may be in your stat pack in here, and of course, you served on this committee a long time, so you understand that stat pack can be misleading at first because there are a number of cities and towns that have to be split because of their population. There are a number of cities and towns that have ETJ districts that were annexed that make it impossible to keep them completely together. So those are on those numbers. That's what I anticipate presenting on Monday. But I think those numbers are already in that stat pack. But again, I'll go through them and try to analyze those for the lady.
I appreciate that. Thank you. A follow-up on another point raised by Representative Hawkins about the nature of these seemingly less than compact urban house districts. And I'm just wondering, in the past, we've been pretty public about which compactness scores we used. Can you tell us which ones we used in the drawing of this map?
So we didn't use any sort of traditional measurement in measuring the compactness of the districts. And as the lady will see in the written instructions that were sent to the map drawer, it was more so a sense of just taking reasonable measures to make them just visually reasonably compact, because at some point in my experience with the compactness scores, you sort of reach a point of diminishing returns, and it's not necessarily the case that one district that has a compactness score better than the other is necessarily a better district because of the other concerns that we deal with in a district, including trying to keep cities, counties, towns whole. So again, the chair would just say that I know the lady mentioned some of the urban areas, but and again, I'm not presenting on the actual map itself today, but I think only a couple of VTDs in those urban areas are split, and some of them are oddly shaped. That is, the VTD is oddly shaped, and as you know, if you don't want to split VTDs, you got to deal with those weird shapes sometimes in the maps. So again, I'll speak more specifically to that on Monday. Ladies recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I heard you say earlier that part of the reason why y'all didn't feel compelled to hold more public hearings was that the population hasn't changed much. And I'm just wondering, it sort of begs the question, why are we drawing new maps in the House? And first of all, we have a constitutional prohibition on mid-decadal drawing unless ordered by court. And I'm just actually wondering why we actually are considering new House maps right now. Well,
of course, I understand the lady's point, but the North Carolina Supreme Court would disagree with the mid-decade redrawing argument. Of course, they've told us that we can redraw all 3 of these maps. But the reason why, and we were here for all of those draws, is they were all drawn under a faulty legal theory, and that was that essentially political or election contest data could not be used when, in fact, nothing in the Constitution says anything of the sort, and this state has that's been a traditional redistricting criteria in the state for 250 years. So, ultimately the maps in 21 and 22 are not what this body would have passed without those incorrect court decisions. And so now that the court of last resort in North Carolina has made clear what the law is, this body can't go back in time, obviously, and we've got different members now. So, of course, we'll try to do the best we can with the law being clarified now. We'll draw these maps. Please recognize.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I guess we'll agree to disagree on the merits of those state Supreme Court decisions, but I want to pivot back to an issue that Representative Carney raised about transparency and public participation. So all of us received on September 25th, a letter from, I think it was 50 groups recommending the more transparent process. I do recall you were very proud of the 2021 transparency, and which actually wasn't court-directed. And I'm just looking through a lot of the comments that were made in the letter, and then having attended the public hearings, one of the public hearings, and then watched the others on the on live streamed, and then reading through the hundreds of public comments that we've received thus far. There was a real strong push for more public input, more opportunities for hearings around the state, pointing out that in 2011 we had 63, and then 2021 we had the 14 congressional districts, and this time around we only had 3. And some areas that weren't particularly accessible, and also during the end of business hour, so a lot of people found it difficult to get there. So I'm frustrated by that lack of ability for public input, but we have had a lot of public input for those who did participate. And I'm just wondering, were y'all able to take into account all that public input when you were drawing these maps?
Well, so I guess the lady knows that a lot of public input we had that they couldn't be reconciled. So by way of example, one gentleman on the public comment portal noted that he believed that Democrats were destroying this state and country, and he recommended that the committee gerrymander the hell out of North Carolina, I believe is the direct quote. Others felt that your party was doing great, and that things needed to be done in an opposite way, and certain quotas needed to be drawn. And so obviously there's no way to reconcile all of the public comments. And in fact, many members of the public would note that they believe that it was impossible for members of this body to lose on the maps that were being drawn, and that if that wasn't changed, that they would vote those members out. Things that are not consistent with what we're able to do here, as a committee. We have the whole county provision. So I say that to make the point of, we've heard from probably thousands of people across this state about the way that they wish that this process would be conducted. All of you all on this committee and myself are all elected and accountable to our constituents, and just like any other bill, we don't have this across the state public comment every time we pass one. Now, for redistricting, obviously the hope is it lasts a decade, but the same thing is the case with a budget. We hope the money that's being spent in a budget for various parts of the state goes on to provide help and support for given places across the state over a decade. And, of course, we don't have public comments across the state because, as our state constitution lays out, the members of this body are elected to come and make the votes on this case. So, yet was public comment considered? Yes, certainly was. We heard from those folks. I've gone through and read a lot of the public comments online, as I'm sure other members of this committee have. But at the end of the day, it's impossible to make every person happy who made a public comment. So all we can do is absorb the things that we hear and put that forth in drawing the maps, and that's what I believe we have done. Lady continues to be recognized.
I appreciate that, and actually I read that gentleman's comment, and I think he used stronger language. But I did want to point out that from what I could glean from all the comments that I heard and read online, that 90% asked for more public participation, more transparency. The fact that we aren't actually even having hearings on maps after they're drawn does seem like a real shortcoming. And I will just point out they also asked us to avoid gerrymandering, and that seemed to be, and to enact an independent redistricting commission, which I realize this body's not going to do right now. But I do think we ought to take into account the public goes to a lot of trouble, at least especially those who come and participate, to think about what they're saying. And I do think this process could have been much more transparent, with all due respect. I did want to just make one comment on, if I could get my notes here, on the comment you made about the 2019 decision. I do believe the North Carolina Supreme Court didn't say you couldn't partisan, they said that you couldn't partisan gerrymander, but I don't think they said you couldn't use partisan data, unless I'm misremembering that. But thank you.
Now, in 2019, of course, that was the three-judge panel that had issued the written order that directed us to come in and draw the maps on the public terminals, and that, as I recall, that order said that election data could not be used, but I may be misremembering that. Of course, and that's what we continued to operate under as we went into 21, because that was the only ruling we had. Representative Carney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have another clarifying question, and that is about the congressional maps. Is it my understanding that the Senate presented 2 congressional maps? Is that correct?
Yes, 2 were filed in the Senate.
Okay. So they will vote, they're going to meet and vote on those Monday. Then they will come to us on Tuesday. I think I heard you say. They will come out, those congressional maps will come to us on Tuesday along with the Senate House.
That's right. So Tuesday,
right.
Tuesday we will do congressional and state Senate in this committee, and very likely in rules as well, so long as time allows. Of course, if we run out of room to get rules, maybe we won't, but we'll see. But just plan for rules as well. But yeah, Tuesday, congressional and Senate in this committee.
So my clarifying question is, the Senate will vote out one map to send to us. We will not see the other map in committee, just the one map they passed out. And I'm asking that because, well, we're going to be asked to vote on a map for congressional districts that the Senate had 2 options. They chose one, and they're going to send us theirs. Are we not going to have the opportunity to weigh in and debate both before we decide to vote on one?
It's a good question, and so obviously, I can't say for sure what the Senate might do, whether they would pass one or both, but I anticipate they will pass at least one, and I won't say what I was going to say because we got a budget passed.
Well, I'll say
so
this.
It's all as well that ends well. But to answer your question, though, one will come over. At least one will come over, and of course, whatever it is, we can amend it just like any other bill that they're going to send over. So, yeah, we'll have a chance to debate and speak to whatever map comes over, and maybe if they passed both of them, who knows if this committee would even take up both of them or either of them for that matter. Maybe we'll do a new one. Who knows?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll stay tuned.
Thank you. Members, is there any other discussion or debate? Representative Harrison.
I apologize, Mr. Chair, but I forgot to ask. A couple points. So, Mr. Springhetti, y'all hired Mr. Springhetti to help you as a consultant to draw the maps. Did y'all use other consultants?
No, not as far as I know. When you say y'all, I mean, I don't know exactly what the Senate may have done. I'll let those Senate members, speak to whatever. But as always the case, we sort of do a separate process from what the Senate does. But the consultant that was used on our side was Mr. Springhetti, and as far as if he spoke to anyone else, like in a literal sense, if he spoke to anybody else, I don't know the answer to that. But I don't believe that he was relying heavily on anyone but himself and the members of this body who he spoke to in drawing those maps.
Thank you, and I meant House. Also, you referenced a bunch of elections that you directed Mr. Springhetti to use, and I couldn't write them all down, but I think you said something about and other elections. But are you going to list those elections on the criteria that you're sending out?
Yeah, so you're going to get a couple of things. One of them you already have. The stat pack that you have out, those are the elections that were actually in the computer when Maptitude was put on the computer here at the state computer here that Mr. Springhetti used when he was down here making changes to those maps. The other document you're going to receive would be the instructions that we sent to Mr. Springhetti, and it had a number of elections on there, but The difference is, the chair's told, the Maptitude program that was put on the computer here in North Carolina, it had some additional elections on it, I think from 2020 and 2022. I guess it would have to be. But in any event, those elections are in the stat pack. Those additional elections are in the stat pack. And I just note that because in a literal sense, when those maps were being changed here at the legislature, those additional elections were in the system and could be looked at. And I think that was a issue with ISD or somebody in the nonpartisan staff, and as I understand it, they had a difficult time narrowing down the election results that we had instructed.
Thank you.
Okay, members, if there's no further discussion or debate at this point, again, the chair would just, to be clear to all members, you've got an opportunity to put forth amendments. You've got an opportunity to put forth entire maps if you wish to do that. There are rooms available. If anybody doesn't know where that room might be, or you don't want to use that room and you want to have another opportunity to draw maps, amendments, or whole maps or otherwise, if you'll let me know, I will do all I can to give you your own room if you desire that. But I want all committee members to have the ability to make amendments and draw maps as they see fit, using whatever method they see fit to use. But again, I would just ask that you attempt to get those amendments in to the chair by 1 p.m. on Monday. We're going to meet at 3 p.m. on Monday. So what that does is gives us a couple of hours ahead of time for staff to get these amendments ready. Every time you have an amendment, there's a new stat pack that they've got to go through, a tremendous amount of documents that they've got to get passed out to the committee. We have to obviously have time to review those and discuss them, and who knows, it may work to the benefit of your amendment if chairs can see it ahead of time. So again, 1 p.m. deadline to send in any amendments or complete alternate maps, I guess, that you would be proposing to this committee. The chair would ask that in an effort to try to help Ms. Churchill, that if you think that you might put forth an amendment, please try to let her know that today. And I understand you're not necessarily maybe ready to tell her exactly what you want, but if you are going to, if you think you might, just let her know so that she can have at least a tally of folks to try to get an idea on the schedule, because what we do in scheduling these committees often is consult with the nonpartisan staff to make sure that they're able to get the job done, do all the things they need to do, because they've got to do this for the Senate as well. So again, third or fourth time, I reiterate, try to, if you think you might do an amendment, please let Erica Churchill know today that you might do an amendment. And then, of course, speak with her about when to send it to her and how. But whatever you do, just enter it in to send it to the chairs of the committee by 1 p.m. on Monday. And of course, we will meet at 3 p.m. on Monday. Chair will send out the various things that were directed to be sent out today to the committee members, and I imagine those things will be sent out today. Again, if you need help or assistance with a computer terminal to draw your own amendments, let the chair know that, or any of these chairs. We'll make it happen to where you can get a terminal. And again, I just note those terminals have already been open now for a couple of months, but my point is, if you don't like that terminal and you want to do it by yourself, let me know and we'll figure that out. So with that said, is there any other discussions, debates, or questions? Seeing none, the committee is now adjourned.